Oh, okay, so I want to talk in this video about the Caster Semenya situation. Many of you will be aware that Caster Semenya is probably the most successful female middle distance runner of the past decade, had phenomenal success, especially in the 800 meters event. But throughout that past decade, she has been dogged by controversy with regard to whether or not she has an intersex condition, whether or not she has elevated levels of testosterone, indeed whether she ought to be allowed to compete in the women's stroke female category at all, and if so, under what conditions. And the reason that I want to make this video is that I want to try and give you a lot of information within this video. And the reason that I want to try and give you a lot of information is that I think there's a lot of misinformation around and a lot of misconception. And I think that a lot of people are taking quite hard stances on this in an absence of that kind of information. And I think that will probably apply to the vast majority of people watching this video, which is an unusual thing. I don't think I've ever said that in 11 years, but I believe that to be the case here. I don't blame you for that. In fact, if you went back 3 or 4 months, you couldn't even have all of this information, because most of this information you would need to know confidential medical details about Caster Semenya to know the things that we know now, but as a result of certain other factors, we know those things now. So a lot of people are adopting a position, for example, whereas with regard to trans women competing in the women's category, they have no problem with it, but they do expect HRT, they do expect anti-androgens, and for those testosterone levels to be brought down from typically male levels to typically female levels. Obviously, that is their position. Very, very few people believe that trans women ought to be able to compete in women's sport without some kind of hormonal suppression to suppress those testosterone levels. And yet at the same time, they feel that the Caster Semenya situation is quite different, because Caster Semenya, well, she's female, and so if she has these elevated levels, she has them as a result of being female. If that is your position and your understanding, I am here to tell you that your understanding is wrong, and that is why you are arriving at an erroneous conclusion. And I hope that you will agree with me by the end of this video that the Caster Semenya situation and the situation of other athletes who have these DSDs, disorders or differences of sexual development that fall under these regulations, need to be treated in more or less the same light as we would treat trans women who are competing in women's sport. As I say, there's a lot to get across here. There's some science to get across. I want to go through the IAAF, the International Association of Athletics Federations DSD regulations, to give you some idea of what is involved in there, to talk about Caster Semenya's appeal and the Court of Arbitration's sports finding against her and a couple of bits that they had to say, then look at some more recent IAAF pronouncements with regard to that, and then do a little bit of a prediction on how this is going to pan out and be transposed, comported across in actual fact from the situation of women with these intersex conditions to the business of trans women. Okay, all that to fit in, it's quite a lot. I think the first thing that I should do is give you a little bit of background. So let me try and give you as brief a run through of this as I can while going through the pertinent points. In 2008, she won a couple of 800 meters golds in major international youth championships. Then in 2009, she won the World Championships 800 meters gold in a time that was about 8 seconds faster than her winning times the year before. That's a big margin over 800 meters. That drew a lot of attention to her, as did her very, very deep voice, as did her muscly physique, and people started to talk about this athlete and was there some kind of condition going on that needs to be looked into. Duly, the IAAF said that she had to have a series of sex verification tests, which are outlined, by the way, as what those tests involve, and they asked Athletics South Africa, her sporting federation, to conduct those tests. We were never party to the results of those, because obviously you have issues of medical confidentiality, and that medical confidentiality and the reluctance, the reticence of Caster Semenya to clarify anything herself other than to say that God has made me the way I am over the past 10 years has meant that all we could really do up until very, very recently is speculate in what is involved. But duly as a result of those tests, we knew something was going on because the IAAF made her ineligible for women's sport for 11 months. 2010, and during 2010 she was cleared to compete again. 2011 the IAAF set in place their first set of regulations to try and cover these things, and what they did is they set a 10 nanomole testosterone limit for female athletes competing in track and field events that fall under their remit at the elite level. 2012 then, competing under those regulations, she'd lowered her level, one presumes. She won the silver in the 2012 Olympic Games in London, which was upgraded after the event to a gold because the gold medalist, a Russian athlete, a Russian woman, was disqualified for doping. 2014, another athlete, this time a sprinter, Indian sprinter, Duti Chand, appealed against these regulations. Again, we can only speculate. She was obviously subject to them. Obviously, going down to 10 nanomoles was affecting her performance. So she appealed to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, and they found in her favour that this wasn't sufficiently, it seemed a bit sketchy to them, and what they said is, we're suspending, IAAF suspend this for 2 years, come back to us when you've got more to go on here. So that was the position, and then of course Caster Semenya could just compete with her natural levels again. In 2016, back to her natural levels, she won the gold in the 2016 Olympics. Roll on to 2018, the IAAF now has its ducks in order with regard to this, and it comes out with its new DSD regulations. One of the things that CAS had asked for, which quite a number of endocrinologists, sports scientists thought was a little bit over the top because it's so difficult to evidence these things with a small number of individuals, is that they wanted sort of every event evidencing on its own. Every single event needs to be shown that there's an advantage. Not something that we apply anywhere else in sport, right? When we take a performance-enhancing drug, you don't have to evidence it in every single event in every different sport, but that was what they asked for. So duly as a result of that, the IAAF limited it to the events 400 metres through to the mile, which was the events that they thought were the worst hit, and this is sort of their initial position, and they've said that they're looking to expand it in the future, but this is what they want to deal with first. So that's the events 400 metres, 800 metres, 1500 metres, and the mile, effectively. Caster Semenya wasn't happy with this. Obviously, from her perspective, one assumes she was happy to go down to 10 nanomoles, but to 5 nanomoles. She'd lost a couple of seconds anyway. She obviously feels she's going to lose too much to be competitive. So she challenged it. She took this new set of regulations to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and duly in 2019, the Court of Arbitration for Sport found against her and in favour of the IAAF. It has to be said that her federation, ASA, Athletics South Africa, were not happy about this. Listen to the rhetoric that they used. Athletics South Africa said it was deeply disappointed and profoundly shocked that the court had ruled in favour of the new regulations and that it would consider appealing the disgraceful decision. We are reeling in shock at how a body held in high esteem like CAS can endorse discrimination without flinching. South Africa knows discrimination better, and CAS has seen it fit to open the wounds of apartheid, a system of discrimination condemned by the whole world as a crime against humanity. They went there, they likened what was happening to Caster Semenya to in some way, shape or form to the discrimination that was taking place in apartheid, obviously wanting to get the racial overtones. It's because she's black, it's because she's African, etc., etc. When you hear what is actually involved here, you will be able to set for yourself that statement in some context. So hold that in your mind. But that shows you how highly strung all of this is. Caster Semenya hadn't finished. She then appealed to the Swiss courts Court of Arbitration for Sport is based in Switzerland, to have that decision of the Court of Arbitration for Sport overturned. And this is how the wider scope of the law is going to impact on this, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. At the moment, we're in a position where they have made what they call a super provisional order. They hadn't even spoken to the IAAF. They hadn't even told the IAAF that this was taking place. But purely on the basis of speaking to Caster Semenya's legal team, they have set a super provisional order in place, suspending the IAAF's DSD regulations, but only for Caster Semenya and not for anybody else. See how complicated this has become. The IAAF has responded in very harsh terms to what has taken place there. That is kind of where we're at the moment. So all of this has taken place, especially in recent months, amongst some absolutely awful, I have to say, misrepresentation across media generally. Well, either misrepresentation or misunderstanding. I don't want to attribute motive here. But there are two aspects in which the media have misportrayed this. The first is in terms of discrimination, and picking up on the fact that CAS itself admits that discrimination is taking place, and seeing discrimination as something that we automatically assume is wrong. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Even to segregate sport into male and female categories in the first place, and then set different standards, different qualifying times or distances in those different events, and having different rules and regulations applying in terms of those things, is discriminatory. But what we do is we apply the principle that we are always expected to apply when we're talking about discrimination involving protected characteristics, which is that it is okay if it is a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aim. Let me read you from the CAS executive summary with regard to their decision. The panel found that the DSD regulations are discriminatory, but that, on the basis of the evidence submitted by the parties, such discrimination is a necessary, reasonable and proportionate means of achieving the legitimate objective of ensuring fair competition in female athletics in certain events and protecting the protected class of female athletes in those events. Note that CAS also acknowledges that female athletics is a protected class. So that was the first misrepresentation. The second misrepresentation is this idea that Caster Semenya and these other athletes are female athletes who just happen to have a high level of testosterone and maybe have some kind of intersex condition, perhaps. In fact, here is a well-known hyperbolic YouTuber making exactly those comments in his misrepresentation of the Caster Semenya situation.
Now, I should note at this point, Caster Semenya is a cisgender woman. Some of you thought I was going somewhere different with that story. For those of you who may be new to this channel, cis or cisgender is the scientific term for someone who identifies with their birth-assigned gender. The opposite of transgender, if you will. Now, there has been some speculation as to whether Caster Semenya is intersex, a label which refers to someone with atypical sex development, meaning that while Semenya has correctly always been viewed and treated as a woman, she may have an atypical configuration of sexual characteristics, such as increased levels of testosterone.
And I really can't stop myself also reading out this other little spicy take that the same YouTuber gave us. It's not a hot take, this ought to be a cold take, because this is a good month after the Court of Arbitration for Sport gave its summary and all the details are out there, but this is what he had to say. And he said, and as Caster Semenya has shown us, it's not all about the penis. Simply being a black butch lesbian with elevated levels of testosterone is enough to get called out. So is that all it's about? Well, I can't comment on the fact of whether Caster Semenya being a black butch lesbian has any relevance. I didn't even know that she was. But what I can talk about is these two things of her being a cis woman, and also the fact of, well, maybe she has some kind of intersex condition. With regard to her being a cis woman, first let me say that that is true. And the YouTuber you just saw told you what a cis woman was, And duly that is the case, but you need to listen very carefully to what he said, because what you think a cis woman is and what most people think a cis woman is isn't necessarily what a cis woman is. What most people think a cis woman is somebody who is biologically female but identifies as a woman. But as he said in that little video clip, it's actually somebody who was given the gender assignment female at birth and identifies as a woman. So effectively what that means is, to try and explain that, when I was born at home, so there was only a midwife there was no doctor. Had that midwife been on the sherry, and had she been a bit fuzzy and hazy and decided that I was a little girl and written down female, then I would be a trans man, because I would identify as a man, but I would have been assigned female at birth. And if in a couple of years I decided to identify as a woman, I would then be a cis woman because I'd been assigned the identity female at birth and regard myself in the present as a woman, despite the fact that I am 100% biologically male. So you need to be aware of that. The fact that Caster Semenya is a cis woman and is being called a cis woman, do not let that fool you into thinking that means she is biologically female. That is a different thing. But what about this business that, well, maybe she's got some kind of intersex condition? Okay, well, what we know is, as a result of the IAAF's recent policy, is that she definitely has an intersex condition. She definitely has a disorder of sexual development, and a very serious, in actual fact, disorder of sexual development as pertains to the protected class of female sport. What I want to do is to read you a few extracts from the IAAF's literature and also from the CAS summary, and when you piece them together you will see what the situation is. Okay, let me start off with this one. This is from the explanatory notes Q&A for the IAAF's DSD regulations for female classification. As the Court of Arbitration for Sport panel recognised in Chand versus IAAF and AFI 2014, men have significant advantages in size, strength and power over women, due in large part to men's much higher levels of circulating testosterone from puberty onwards. Because of the impact that such advantages can have on sporting performance, it is generally accepted that competition between male and female athletes would not be fair and meaningful and would risk discouraging women from participation in the sport. Therefore, in common with many other sports, the IAAF has created separate competition categories or classifications for male and female athletes. They go on. Under the question, what is the evidence on what these new regulations are based? Most females, including elite female athletes, have low levels of testosterone circulating naturally in their bodies in the range 0.12 to 1.79 nanomoles per litre in blood. While after puberty the normal male range is much higher, in the range 7.7 to 29.4 nanomoles per litre. Absent a DSD or a tumour, no female would have serum levels of testosterone of 5 nanomoles per litre and above, but individuals with DSDs can have very high levels of natural testosterone extending into and even beyond the normal male range. There is a broad medical and scientific consensus that if these individuals are sensitive to androgens, i.e. they have properly functioning androgen receptors, such very high levels of natural testosterone can increase their muscle mass and strength, as well as their levels of circulating hemoglobin, and so significantly enhance their sporting potential. Experts consulted by the IAAF have gathered and reviewed all of the published evidence and data which indicates that increasing the level of circulating testosterone from the normal female range to the normal male range leads to an increased muscle mass and strength and higher hemoglobin levels. In particular, increasing testosterone levels in women from 0.9 nanomoles to just 7.3 nanomoles increases muscle mass by 4% and muscle strength by 12 to 26%, while increasing it to 5, 7, 10 and 19 nanomoles per litre respectively increases circulating hemoglobin by 6.5%, 7.8, 8.9 and 11% respectively. Taking all available knowledge and data into account, the experts estimate that the ergogenic advantage in having circulating testosterone levels in the normal male range rather than the normal female range is greater than 9%. So there they are setting out why you have to take account of these things. Okay, next let's have a look at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I need you to listen very carefully to this because this outlines some things you will not realise about the DSD regulations before I go into them in a little bit more depth. During the course of the proceedings before the CAS, the IAAF explained that, following an amendment to the DSD regulations, the DSD covered by the regulations are limited to 46XY DSD, i.e. conditions where the affected individual has XY chromosomes. Accordingly, no individual with XX chromosomes are subjected to any restrictions or eligibility conditions under the DSD regulations. Athletes with 46XY DSD have testosterone levels well into the male range. The DSD regulations require athletes with 46XY DSD who have a natural testosterone level of above 5 nanomoles per litre and who experience a material androgenizing effect from that enhanced testosterone level to reduce their natural testosterone level to within the normal female range, i.e. to a level below 5 nanomoles per litre, and to maintain that reduced level for a continuous period of at least 6 months in order to be eligible to compete in a restricted event in an international competition. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of where we are at there. Okay, these are athletes who are 46XY. It's really important for you to understand that. It's even more important for you to understand that this is not just any old DSD. This is from the actual IAAF regulations that are under dispute. Eligibility regulations for the female classification in brackets athletes with differences of sex development. Version 2 published on the 1st of May 2019, coming into effect as the 8th of May. A relevant athlete is an athlete who meets each of the following 3 criteria. She has one of the following DSDs: 5-alpha reductase type 2 deficiency, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, because that is the one, when you listen to the legal representatives for the IAAF, or the IAAF more centrally talking about this, this is the one they talk about. This is the one that say is the most common, and the fact it's the one they always talk about makes me think it's probably the ones that the likes of Caster Semenya actually have. B, partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, which, just let me read you a little paragraph here which clarifies just the situation with regard to that. So this is from the Q&A notes. Some DSD athletes have natural mutations that make their androgen receptors completely or partially insensitive to testosterone. If they are completely androgen insensitive, then the regulations do not apply to them. However high is what it's saying, right? If you have testes and they're kicking out testosterone of any level, it doesn't matter how high it is, if you're completely androgen insensitive, then these regulations do not apply. If they are partially androgen insensitive, the regulations only apply to them if they are sufficiently androgen sensitive that their elevated testosterone levels have a material androgenizing effect. That was the term that you heard Cass use a minute ago. This is to be assessed by an expert independent medical panel based on physical evaluation and endocrine testing, but with the benefit of any doubt on the issue to be resolved in favour of the athlete. Okay. The three other criteria, the three other DSDs that are covered: 17-beta hydroxysteroid hydrogenase type 3 deficiency, D, ovotesticular DSD, and E, any other genetic disorder involving disordered gonadal steroidogenesis. And as a result, she has circulating testosterone levels in blood of 5 nanomoles per litre or above, and she has sufficient androgen sensitivity for those levels of testosterone to have a material androgenizing effect. So now we do not know exactly what Caster Semenya has got, but what we do know is this isn't just a female athlete who may have some kind of intersex condition that leads to high levels of testosterone. This is effectively a biological male who is kicking out biological male levels of testosterone, having gone through a male puberty, if you read about these different conditions. This is what we know, that the athletes under these regulations like Caster Semenya are 46XY. So they are chromosomally male. They are not completely androgen insensitive. We know because of the nature of the regulations that they are hormonally male, that they have testosterone levels that are within the normal male range and won't have estrogen and progesterone levels. Why? Because we also know that they have male gonads because of the nature of these DSDs. So they are also male in that respect. So they are male in terms of their gonads, which ultimately determines whether you're biologically male or female, in terms of their hormones and in terms of their chromosomes. In terms of Caster Semenya, what she has on the other side is possibly her genitalia might be typically female, or they may be ambiguous. But more important of all, folks, what Caster Semenya has, which is what has confounded this entire thing, is that she has a slip of paper that has the word female written across it. And this is part of the problem. And in many ways, that seems to be trumping everything else. Having a slip of paper with the word female written across it seems to be more important than having 46XY chromosomes, having a set of bollocks that are kicking out testosterone and quite possibly sperm as well, because some of these conditions you can still become pregnant with medical help. Correction, that should have said father children with medical help. And being hormonally male and having gone through a male puberty. What it might be useful to do at this point is to scope out for you 5-alpha reductase deficiency, so you have an idea of how it works, what kind of impact it would have on sport, but also why somebody with it could end up being assigned female at birth when they are actually biologically male. And the information that I'm giving you, I'm getting from the paper Circulating Testosterone as the Hormonal Basis of Sex Differences in Athletics Performance, 2018 paper in Endocrine Reviews, Handelsman, Hirschberg and Berman. I mentioned it, I went through part of this in my recent video reviewing the science with regard to trans women in sport, and duly, this is a paper that the IAAF are quoting over numerous things. I won't read you the paragraph from this because it's even drier than the stuff that I've just read you, but let me explain what it says. 5-alpha reductase is an enzyme that plays an important role in embryological development. As a male embryo develops, ladies and gentlemen, it develops these tiny little testes. They're not a lot to crow about, at that point in time. But what they do is they start pumping out a little bit of testosterone. And this enzyme's job is to catalyze that testosterone and turn it into dihydrotestosterone, DHT, which is another androgen. But it has a stronger androgenic effect. And it plays an important part in virilizing, masculinizing the embryo's external genitalia. And without that, all you have is the testosterone, and that isn't enough. And what you end up with is a fetus and then a baby that is born with either typically female-looking genitalia, most usually, or ambiguous genitalia, or occasionally male-looking genitalia, but with a kind of micropenis condition there. Okay, so this is why you get in the position where at birth they get assigned female, even though they're not female. They are chromosomally male. They have internal testes that work. They have bodies that are sensitive to testosterone when it is produced and will respond to it. And duly, as they get to puberty, those testes kick into life. Those Leydig cells start kicking out that testosterone and they start a male puberty. So strong is that male puberty that in Western countries, 50% of individuals with this condition then change their assigned sex to male because it's apparent what is going on. And by the way, this is probably an important point to make. One of the claims is, this always we seem to be dwelling on this because it seems to be mainly African and athletes from less developed countries that seem to have these conditions. It's probably very well the case that just as we have with things like acromegaly and things like that, which we can identify now, and in Western countries and more developed countries we treat, it could well be that as kids get to puberty, we are finding and taking a grasp of this and saying, hey, this is what's going on. Whereas if you're in a country like an African country, or if you're in India or something like that, that doesn't happen. And so you go through puberty, and it's only when you get to 18 or 19 or 20 years old and are competing as an elite athlete that it actually gets brought to your attention. Just something to bear in mind there. But with this condition, you go through a normal or almost normal male development. Male pubertal development depends upon testosterone and DHT, dihydrotestosterone, but the adult liver is capable of catalyzing some of your testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, so that makes up some of the shortfall and that accounts for that puberty. So you can see that from everything that is physiologically important in sport as we understand it, because prior to puberty, boys and girls seem to be equal in terms of all the physiological metrics that are important with regard to sport, that all the bits that are important for sport, that somebody such as Caster Semenya is biologically male and not biologically female. This really is not the case of some biological female who may have some vague intersex condition that gives them a little bit more testosterone. These are individuals who, certainly in terms of what is important physiologically in sport, are potentially every bit as male as I am. Every bit as male, in fact, even as Usain Bolt is, or Mike Tyson is. Can you see now what an absurdity it is to say, well, yes, okay, trans women can compete in sport, but hey, they've got this advantage as a result of being biologically male, so we need to pull their testosterone levels down to typically female levels, and yet not make the same case for individuals, other biological males who are competing in the same category, but without these regulations, entirely unrestricted and with levels of testosterone well into the male levels. In fact, one of the things the IAAF mentions in its report is a study where what they did in the previous round, where they'd suppressed testosterone levels, they took 3 anonymous case studies of elite athletes who'd had to reduce it, And those elite athletes were all around the 20 to 22 nanomole limit. Now, who were those elite athletes? We don't know that one of them was Caster Semenya, but given that Caster Semenya was an elite athlete who had been asked to reduce it, there is every indication that Caster Semenya could well have been competing in the range of 20 to 20 nanomoles of testosterone against female competitors who are generally in the 0.12 to 1.79 range. I hope that has made my point with regard to this. Part of the issue that we have, though, is that the laws that we've formulated to deal with discrimination and equality, even with the grounds that we have with regard to accepting exceptions if it's a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aim, are not made with sport in mind. And sport is very quirky. We do not segregate. We do not wish to segregate. We would not wish to segregate the rest of our society in the way we do sport. It's a very, very special exception. And it's a special exception we make not due to male privilege and patriarchy, but actually for the benefit of women, for the benefit of females. How bizarre, how wrong-headed of us if that legislation is what ends up confounding and damaging women's sport. And yet we are in danger of that. When Caster Semenya is now taking this to the Swiss court, there is a chance that the Swiss court will hold that Caster Semenya having a slip of paper that says female trumps everything that I have told you in this video. And that is a real, terrible danger here, because whereas some of you have said with regard to the trans issue that, well, come back to us when trans women are dominating and we'll talk then. When there's something to be concerned about, come back to us and we'll start being concerned. We are already at that point here, folks. Be in no doubt about it. Caster Semenya has won the last 30 800 meters races that she has run. In the Diamond League, this is the elite international athletics league. Since 2015, every single 800 meters race has been won by a woman who has one of these qualifying disorders of sexual development. How do we know that? Because every single one of those races has been won either by Caster Semenya or by Francine Niyonsaba, who also finished second, took the silver medal to Semenya's gold medal at the 2016 Rio Olympics. And then we have Margaret Wambui, who got the bronze medal at those Olympics. Now, unlike Francine Niyonsaba, we know she has one of these DSDs. Why? Because she had the kindness to come out a couple of months ago and tell us all that she did. If she hadn't, all we would have done was have kept having the suspicions. Margaret Wambui hasn't. But the same suspicions, for all exactly the same reasons, surround Margaret Wambui as surrounded Francine Niyonsaba, as surrounded Caster Semenya. So there is every chance, ladies and gentlemen, that in the women's 800 metres at the 2016 Olympic Games, the entire podium was populated by biological males who were competing without even the slightest amount of testosterone reduction, right? If that isn't a cause for concern, then I don't know what is. I hope at this point I've convinced you that if you saw this as something, well, this is ridiculous, this is a terrible imposition, this is a human rights violation to make this kind of imposition on the likes of Caster Semenya and all the other athletes in this category. They don't have to take this reduction. They can compete in the men's categorization, or they can compete in other events that at present do not fall under the remit of these regulations, but to compete in those, because of what I've showed you, these regulations have been met. And they seem the very minimum that the IAAF could have done. And yet, because of the way that the law is applied, it's actually the maximum that they could have done at the moment. And that, I think, is a point for concern for all of us going forwards. Okay. Does this have any impact, lastly, upon the case involving trans women? I think there's a couple of little breadcrumbs here that I'm going to read out to you that I think make that case. So let me start with this. It's another section from the Q&A for the DSD regulations by the IAAF. What is the IAAF's position in relation to trans athletes? The IAAF also has an inclusive approach to the participation of trans athletes in sport, currently reflected in its regulations governing eligibility of athletes who have undergone sex reassignment to compete in women's competitions. It is currently reviewing and updating those regulations in light of the evidence identified above, some of which I read out to you with regard to the levels of testosterone that are typically male and female, and in light of the learnings from the IOC's 2015 consensus meeting on sex reassignment and hyperandrogenism, and expects to issue updated regulations on this topic in the coming months. And then further, this is from their statement, quite a hardball response to the Swiss Federal Tribunal order regarding the DSD regulations. Bear in mind what I said, that they'd instructed the IAAF to suspend them pending a challenge. The IAAF fully respects each individual's personal dignity and supports the social movement to have people accepted in society based on their chosen legal sex and or gender identity, which I agree with as well. However, the IAAF is convinced there are some contexts, sport being one of them, where biology has to trump identity. Boom! I agree with that bit as well. Then this. The IAAF also believes the right to participate in sport does not translate to a right to self-identify into a competition category or an event, or to insist on inclusion in a preferred event, or to win in a particular event without regard to the legitimate rules of the sport or the criteria for entry. It is legitimate for all sport in general, and for the IAAF in particular, to create a protected category for females and to base eligibility for this category on biology and not gender identity, underlined. This crucial point was accepted and emphasised by the CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, in its 30th of April 2019 decision to uphold the DSD regulations. To define a category based on something other than biology would be category defeating and would deter many girls around the world from choosing competitive and elite sport after puberty. I should probably also read you this paragraph from the CAS executive summary on the Semenya appeal, because it again applies to trans athletes as well as individuals with these intersex conditions when they are competing in this protected category of women's sport, and it shows that they are in agreement with the IAAF. This is what they wrote. The panel accepts the IAAF's submission that reference to a person's legal sex alone may not always constitute a fair and effective means of making that determination. This is because the reason for the separation between male and female categories in competitive athletics is ultimately founded on biology rather than legal status. The purpose of having separate categories is to protect a class of individuals who lack certain insuperable performance advantages from having to compete against individuals who possess those insuperable advantages. In this regard, the fact that a person is recognised in law as a woman and identify as a woman does not necessarily mean they lack those insuperable performance advantages associated with certain biological traits that predominate in individuals who are generally, but not always, recognised in law as males and self-identify as males. It is human biology, not legal status or gender identity, that ultimately determines which individuals possess the physical traits and which give rise to that insuperable advantage and which do not. So piecing all these bits together, we can see that the IAAF is drawing a line in the sand, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport accepts that they accept why this is the point where you draw the line in the sand, whether it's for people with an intersex condition or whether it's trans women competing, that the basis for having this protected class, as I've kept saying in video after video, is on the basis of biology and how that biology affects your physiology, and you cannot allow advantages to go unchecked. That would be, in the words of the IAAF, category defeating. It is clear that the IAAF, I won't say this is their hill to die on, but this is the point beyond which they are going to dig their heels in and fight tooth and nail, because they know if you lose this fight, you may as well abandon the category entirely and just segregate sport in a different way, or just don't segregate it at all. It is potentially that breaking, that category breaking. With regard to trans athletes and that paragraph that I read particularly, note what they said. That using the evidence that was within those regulations, this is evidence that's relatively new to them, right? That they've only really put together over the last year or two. And they are going to take account of that evidence and apply it more broadly, including to trans women. They are going to be looking at that in the near future and making a decision. What kind of decision are they going to make? I think we got some clues from Joanne Harper, who is of course an advocate for taking the limit down for trans women from 10 nanomoles to 5 nanomoles. Joanna Harper believes that in November, when the IOC meet to discuss this, they will duly reduce that limit. It is interesting, isn't it, that the IAAF say, upcoming, we're doing the same kind of thing. We're going to be minded of this data. And this data has led to a 5 nanomoles limit in these particular events for women who have these disorders of sexual development. I don't think it takes a genius to formulate the idea that that is probably what is going to happen with regard to trans women. You are going to end up with a 5 nanomole limit, which makes so much more sense because that is at the limit of kind of female levels rather than being well into the male limit, which seemingly made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Okay. I've told you everything that I'm going to tell you in this video. I hope you come away from this video knowing quite a bit more about the Caster Semenya situation and her fellow athletes with these conditions than you did before. You now know that they are biological males that have very significant conditions that have put them through a male puberty and make them hormonally male, give them male testes, and they are chromosomally male. To not treat those conditions when you would treat them with trans women absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. We are not talking about female athletes who have some mild tangential intersex condition that may affect their performance in some way or other. And anybody who tries to portray it in that way is trying to mislead you. They should know better if they're making videos on this subject on YouTube or if they're in the media outlining these things. Okay, if you've got this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for getting this far. I hope you've got something out of it. If you're getting something out of these videos, if you're getting something out of my material, I'd ask you to consider supporting my channel. I'll leave you the usual links. Thank you for watching and bye.